Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Monday. Today is April 19th, and as you can see from the board behind me, today we are going to be reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 12. So let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and dive right into the lesson today. Okay, the first thing that we always want to take time to do is to write down our assignment. Today's assignment has you reading Chapter 12 and once again doing a set of notes of your choice. That's going to go on page 65 in your ELA notebook. So go ahead, take a second, write that assignment down, and then once you've written it down, you guys can resume the video. Here we have our table of contents, and we have to scroll way down now. And you can see right here in our table of contents is our page 65, Chapter 12 notes. So, first thing we have to do is read our directions. Okay, these directions have always been the same. First thing that you guys are going to do is, of course, have the opportunity to choose what style of notes you want to do. We've got some students, especially in school, who are really liking the sticky notes and finding those work well. Many people like to do bullets. I've noticed several people really are doing a lot of webs. The one thing I would remind you about with a web is that make sure you're still getting a minimum of 8 to 10 details for every chapter. You kind of want to write them big and then draw your circle around it. When you're doing a web, don't draw the circle and then try to write really small in the circle. All right, and really use the whole page. Okay, don't start really small in the middle. Go ahead, use the whole page when you're doing your web. You can even add pictures into your webs if you want. All right, so our first step then is to go to page 42 in our notebook so that we can choose what type of notes we want to do. And you guys know once you have picked that style of notes, you go to the next page in your notebook and you can start setting up your notes with the date, the title, and the page number. There are still many people here. We are almost into the month of May, and there are many people that are still not bothering to put these things on there. Maybe you have the title, so you'll have on there Chapter 12. But so many people are leaving out page numbers, leaving off dates. These things are important. And because I'm asking you to do them, if I notice that you're not doing them, you're going to lose some points on your notes because you didn't put on the proper heading. Okay, and as a reminder, make sure that those notes go on the left side of your notebook so that we can write the summaries on the right side. So here I am in my notebook on page 42 on my note-taking strategies page. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take some time, I'm going to look through these note-taking strategies. You know, I have noticed there's one student in particular I'm thinking about. She likes to do timelines. She does a lot of timelines. Timelines work great for a story like Harry Potter. I had a student in the last chapter. She was trying to use a Venn diagram. And, you know, you really only want to use a Venn diagram when you know exactly what I can compare and contrast. So I would discourage you from trying to use a Venn diagram. It's definitely challenging. But T-charts are really good. And I would say, you know, the left side of your T-chart would be a good spot to write down like questions that you might have. The right side might be a good spot for you to put down events. Remember, when you do a T-chart, you get to pick what you want to put on each side. Cornell notes are always one of my favorite. They do require you to do a little more work because you have to write yourself a little summary afterwards. Okay, webs work well. And you know I'm a big fan of lists. The one thing I tell students that if you're going to pick a summary, you kind of want to take this note-taking strategy of summaries and combine it with lists. So you might make a list of events, and then after you're done, you write your summary. And that's kind of what we're doing with our notebooks. So when I go in here to my notebook, you see, here are my Chapter 12 notes, and I'm actually using a list. And I had so many events, I actually did 2 columns for my list. But this is a list followed by a summary. So that's kind of what I have been doing. We've always been doing one style of notes, and then we've always been writing a summary. So boys and girls, take a minute, pick the note-taking strategy that you would like to do. Set up your notes with the date. Today is the 19th. It is Chapter 12, the Polyjuice Potion, And this is page 65. So go ahead, take a minute, set those up in your notebook. And then once you have that set up in your notebook, the one thing that we need to do before we read is just go back and do a quick review of what happened in the last chapter. We always want to make sure that we do that. So before I dive into chapter 12, I'm just going to go back here and remind myself about what happened in chapter 11. So if you remember, chapter 11 was called the Dueling Club. This is where Harry, Hermione, and Ron, they've got to steal the ingredients to make the Polyjuice Potion. Professor Lockhart starts his dueling club with Professor Snape. Harry has to duel Draco there at the Dueling Club. Draco casts a snake at Harry. We find out that Harry can talk to snakes, and Ron informs him that he must be a Parselmouth. Now, all of the students are really thinking Harry must be the heir to Slytherin because Salazar Slytherin himself could speak Parselmouth. Near the end of the chapter, Harry finds Justin and Nearly Headless Nick petrified in the hallway. All of the other students catch Harry at the scene, and another Hufflepuff by the name of Ernie says, "Caught in the act this time, Potter." And so now the whole school thinks that Harry is the heir of Slytherin, because we've had several people now who have all been petrified, and somehow Harry always seems to be at the scene of the crime. All right, and while, I know that Harry is not the one opening up the chamber, I do think that it's reasonable for all of the students to think that it's Harry. Because after all, Harry has been caught at the scene every time. And so, what else would they think? So it makes sense that everybody thinks that Harry is responsible, even though we know in our hearts that he's not. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've reviewed the last chapter, let's go ahead. We can open up our books to page 261. It's chapter 12, the Polyjuice Potion. And before reading this chapter, we can make some predictions as to what might happen in this chapter. J.K. Rowling, the author, she does a really good job with these titles. And so I'm going to take a guess here, and I'm going to think this has got to be the chapter where Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally drink the Polyjuice Potion. All right, I do have a bunch of discussion questions. There's a lot of them on there today. As you know, we tend to read, and then we'll stop, and I'll read these to you guys. If you want to take part in the discussions, you got to join the live stream classes, the virtual classes, so that you can participate. If you're just watching the video, you should take the time after the reading to come to these discussion questions and at least read them and think about these answers and how you would answer the questions. Some of them are level 1, some are level 2, and some are level 3. All right, here we go. Chapter 12, the Polyjuice Potion. They stepped off the stone staircase at the top, and Professor McGonagall rapped on the door. It opened silently, and they entered. Professor McGonagall told Harry to wait, and left him there alone. Now remember, Professor McGonagall was taking Harry to Dumbledore's office after that last attack. Harry looked around. One thing was certain. Of all the teachers' offices Harry had visited so far this year, Dumbledore's was by far the most interesting. If he hadn't been scared out of his wits that he was about to be thrown out of school, he would have been very pleased to have a chance to look around it. It was a large and beautiful circular room, full of funny little noises. A number of curious silver instruments stood on spindle-legged tables, whirring and emitting. Now, the word emitting reminds me that when we come to unknown or unfamiliar or just interesting words, go ahead and underline them so you guys can use them for vocabulary models later on. Emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were covered with portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses, all of whom were snoozing gently in their frames. There was also an enormous claw-footed desk, and sitting on a shelf behind it, a shabby, tattered wizard's hat. The Sorting Hat. Harry hesitated. He cast a wary eye around the sleeping witches and wizards on the walls. Surely it couldn't hurt if he took the hat down and tried it on again, just to see, just to make sure it had put him in the right house. He walked quietly around the desk, lifted the hat from its shelf, and lowered it slowly onto his head. It was much too large and slipped down over his eyes, just as it had done the last time he'd put it on. Harry stared at the black inside of the hat, waiting. Then a small voice said in his ear, "Be in your bonnet, Harry Potter?" "Oh, yes," Harry muttered. Sorry to bother you. I wanted to ask." "You've been wondering whether I put you in the right house," said the hat smartly. "Yes, you were particularly difficult to place. But I stand by what I said before." Harry's heart leapt. "You would have done well in Slytherin." Harry's stomach plummeted. He grabbed the point of the hat and pulled it off. It hung limply in his hand, grubby and faded. Harry pushed it back onto its shelf, feeling sick. "You're wrong," he said aloud to the still and silent hat. It didn't move. Harry backed away, watching it. Then a strange gagging noise behind him made him wheel around. Now you guys should take a minute to write something down in your notes. Think about, where is Harry? He's in Dumbledore's office. And what has he done? He's tried on the Sorting Hat because he's worried about whether or not he's in the right house, and that maybe he was supposed to be in Slytherin. So go ahead and take some time to write notes down. Now you guys can see I've written a lot of notes down, kind of really doing a retelling of the chapter. You guys don't want to do that. You guys want to just write down, again, what is Harry doing? Harry is in Dumbledore's office. Why is he there? Because he might be getting in trouble for petrifying Justin and nearly headless Nick. And he tries on the Sorting Hat because he is worried. I'm on page 263 near the top. He wasn't alone after all. Standing on a golden perch behind the door was the decrepit... we have to underline that word. A decrepit-looking bird that resembled a half-plucked turkey. Harry stared at it, and the bird looked balefully back, making its gagging noise again. Harry thought it looked very ill. Its eyes were dull, and even as Harry watched, a couple more feathers fell out of its tail. Harry was just thinking that all he needed was for Dumbledore's pet bird to die while he was alone in the office with it, when the bird burst into flames. Harry yelled in shock and backed away into the desk. He looked feverishly around in case there was a glass of water somewhere, but couldn't see one. The bird, meanwhile, had become a fireball. It gave one loud shriek, and next second there was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash on the floor. The office door opened. Dumbledore came in, looking very somber. "Professor," Harry gasped, "your bird! I couldn't do anything. He just caught fire!" To Harry's astonishment, Dumbledore smiled. "About time, too," he said. "He's been looking dreadful for days. I've been telling him to get a move on." He chuckled at the stunned look on Harry's face. "Fawkes is a phoenix, Harry. Phoenixes burst into flame when it is time for them to die and are reborn from the ashes. Watch him." Harry looked down in time to see a tiny, wrinkled newborn bird poke its head out of the ashes. It was quite as ugly as the old one. "It's a shame you had to see him on a burning day," said Dumbledore, sitting himself behind his desk. "He's really very handsome, most of the time. Wonderful red and gold plumage. Fascinating creatures, phoenixes. They can carry immensely heavy loads. Their tears have healing powers, and they make highly faithful pets. In the shock of Fawkes catching fire, Harry had forgotten what he was there for, but it all came back to him as Dumbledore settled himself in the high chair behind the desk and fixed Harry with his penetrating, light blue stare. All right, before we get into Harry and Dumbledore's conversation, you should write something down about Fawkes, all right, and what happened there with the bird. And again, you guys can see there's a lot that I put in here. Harry hears the gagging noise. There's an old-looking bird. The bird bursts into flames. There's a pile of ash. Professor Dumbledore tells him that his bird is a phoenix, and he explains what phoenixes do, how they burn up when it's time for them to die, and then they are reborn of the ashes. And he tells him about some very special abilities that phoenixes have. Like their tears have healing powers, they can carry very heavy loads, and they are very loyal. Alright, I'm near the bottom of page 264 now. Before Dumbledore could speak another word, however, the door of the office flew open with an almighty bang, and Hagrid burst in, a wild look in his eyes, his balaclava perched on top of his shaggy black head, and the dead rooster still swinging from his hand. "It wasn't Harry, Professor Dumbledore," said Hagrid urgently. "I was talking to him seconds before the kid was found. He never had time, sir." Dumbledore tried to say something, but Hagrid went ranting on, waving the rooster around in his agitation. Every time you hear me pause right there, it's because I'm going back into my book and I'm underlining words. Words like plumage and balaclava and agitation are just a couple that I've highlighted on this last page. Sending feathers everywhere. "It can't have been him. I'll swear it in front of the Ministry of Magic if I have to. Hagrid, You've got the wrong boy, sir. I know. Harry never... Hagrid," said Dumbledore loudly. "I do not think that Harry attacked those people." "Oh," said Hagrid, the rooster falling limply at his side. "Well, right. I'll wait outside then, Headmaster." And he stomped out, looking embarrassed. "You don't think it was me, Professor?" Harry repeated hopefully as Dumbledore brushed the rooster's feathers off his desk. "No, Harry, I don't," said Dumbledore, though his face was somber again. "But I still want to talk to you." Harry waited nervously while Dumbledore considered him, the tips of his long fingers together. "I must ask you, Harry, whether there is anything you'd like to tell me," he said gently. "Anything at all." Harry didn't know what to say. He thought of Malfoy shouting, "You'll be next, mudbloods!" and of the polyjuice potion simmering away in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Then he thought of the disembodied voice he had heard twice, and he remembered what Ron had said. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world. He thought, too, about what everyone was saying about him, and his growing dread that he was somehow connected with Salazar Slytherin. "No," said Harry. "There isn't anything, Professor." So right here, this is a great little paragraph because Dumbledore asks, "Do you want to tell me anything?" And Harry has so many things that we all know he should tell Dumbledore about. Telling him about his suspicions about Malfoy, telling him about the voices he's hearing, telling him about the polyjuice potion that they're brewing. And yet, Harry says, "No, there isn't anything, Professor." And then Harry leaves. Take a minute, write something down in your notes. Okay, and again, you can see I've got some things here in my notes about their conversation. All right, and Harry decides, not to tell Professor Dumbledore about any of it. And this is a really good spot where we could think about a level 2 question. Should Harry have told Dumbledore about these things? Do you think Harry should tell Dumbledore about them? And if you were Harry, what would you do? Would you have told Dumbledore? We could even put you in Ron or Hermione's shoes. If you were Ron and Hermione, what would you encourage Harry to do? Or what would you do if you were one of those characters? See how we can take this last paragraph, and there's just so many great discussion questions that we could ask about this. All right, and if you go over here to mine, you can see, do you think Harry should tell Dumbledore about the voice? Explain. If you were Harry, would you tell Dumbledore about the voice? And my question's focused mostly on the voice, but again, we know that there's several things that Harry could tell Dumbledore about. All right, I'm on page 266, right there at the line break. The double attack on Justin and nearly headless Nick turned what had hitherto, what do you think I'm doing with hitherto? Hitherto been nervousness into real panic. Curiously, it was nearly headless Nick's fate that seemed to worry people most. What could possibly do that to a ghost? People asked each other. What terrible power could harm someone who was already dead? There was almost a stampede to book seats on the Hogwarts Express so that the students could go home for Christmas. Again, J.K. Rowling weaves in very cleverly, telling us about where we are within the year. We're up to Christmas time. She tells us that by explaining that everybody is trying to get on the train so they can get out of there for Christmas vacation. And she doesn't have to say, it's Christmas time, all right? She weaves that detail in, and then it's our responsibility as a reader to follow that timeline right along, all right? So we're up to Christmas time now. At this rate, we'll be the only ones left, Ron told Harry and Hermione. Us, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. What a jolly holiday it's going to be. Crabbe and Goyle, who always did whatever Malfoy did, had signed up to stay over the holidays, too. But Harry was glad that most people were leaving. He was tired of people skirting around him in the corridors, as though he were about to sprout fangs or spit poison. Tired of all the muttering, pointing, and hissing as he passed. Fred and George, however, found all this very funny. They went out of their way to march ahead of Harry down the corridors, shouting, "Make way for the heir of Slytherin! Seriously evil wizard coming through!" Percy was deeply disapproving of this behavior. "It is not a laughing matter," he said coldly. "Oh, get out of the way, Percy," said Fred. "Harry's in a hurry." "Yeah, he's off to the Chamber of Secrets for a cup of tea with his fanged servant," said George Chortling. Again, Chortling, what do you think I'm doing with that? Ginny didn't find it amusing either. "Oh, don't," she wailed every time Fred asked Harry loudly who he was planning to attack next, or when George pretended to ward Harry off with a large clove of garlic when they met. Harry didn't mind. It made him feel better that Fred and George at least thought the idea of his being Slytherin's heir was quite ludicrous. But their antics seemed to be aggravating Draco Malfoy, who looked increasingly sour each time he saw them at it. And now here's an example of where you see two of Harry's friends, okay? These are Ron's older brothers, Fred and George. And they're kind of teasing and making fun, not of Harry, but of the idea that he's the heir of Slytherin. And so, because they are Harry's friends, again, this doesn't upset Harry, this behavior, because again, Harry knows from their actions that they're not teasing Harry. They're teasing everybody who really kind of thinks that Harry's the heir. So Harry finds comfort in what Fred and George are doing. But what everybody else is doing is really driving him crazy. And he says that on the bottom of page 266 and 267. He was tired of people and the way that they were treating him. Like he was actually the heir. So Fred and George joking around about it is something that, again, Harry sees as truly not aggravating, and it's probably helping Harry understand that his friends, at least his true friends, know that this is silly. This is ludicrous that you guys think this. All right, I'm on the very bottom of page 267. It's because he's bursting to say it's really him, said Ron knowingly. You know how he hates anyone beating him at anything, and you're getting all the credit for his dirty work. That's what Ron says about Draco. Not for long, said Hermione in a satisfied tone. The Polyjuice Potion's nearly ready. We'll be getting the truth out of him any day now. Alright, so you guys again should take a second and write something down. Harry and Ron find out from Hermione that the potion is almost ready. Now I'm going to continue to read on page 268. At last the term ended, and a silence deep as the snow on the grounds descended on the castle. Harry found it peaceful rather than gloomy, and enjoyed the fact that he, Hermione, and the Weasleys had the run of Gryffindor Tower, which meant they could play Exploding Snap loudly without bothering anyone, and practice dueling in private. Fred, George, and Ginny had chosen to stay at school rather than visit Bill in Egypt with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Percy, who disapproved of what he termed their childish behavior, didn't spend much time in the Gryffindor common room. He had already told them pompously, great word, that he was only staying over Christmas because it was his duty as a prefect to support the teachers during this troubled time. Christmas morning dawned, cold and white. Harry and Ron, the only ones left in their dormitory, were woken very early by Hermione, who burst in, fully dressed and carrying presents for them both. "Wake up!" she said loudly, pulling back the curtains at the window. "Hermione, you're not supposed to be in here," said Ron, shielding his eyes against the light. "Merry Christmas to you, too," said Hermione, throwing him his present. "I've been up for nearly an hour, adding more lace wings to the potion. It's ready." Harry sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Are you sure?" "Positive," said Hermione, shifting Scabbers the rat so that she could sit down at the end of Ron's four-poster. "If we're going to do it, I say it should be tonight." At that moment, Hedwig swooped into the room, carrying a very small package in her beak. "Hello," said Harry happily as she landed on his bed. "Are you speaking to me again?" She nibbled his ear in an affectionate sort of way, which was a far better present than the one that she had brought him, which turned out to be from the Dursleys. They had sent Harry a toothpick, and a note telling him to find out whether he'd be able to stay at Hogwarts for the summer vacation, too. Now, why bother sending a toothpick? The note, sure, but the toothpick? The rest of Harry's Christmas presents were far more satisfactory. Hagrid had sent him a large tin of treacle fudge, which Harry decided to soften by the fire before eating. Ron had given him a book called Flying with the Cannons, a book of interesting fact about his favorite Quidditch team, and Hermione had bought him a luxury eagle feather quill. Harry opened the last present to find a new hand-knitted sweater from Mrs. Weasley and a large plum cake. He read her card with a fresh surge of guilt, thinking about Mr. Weasley's car, which hadn't been seen since its crash with the Whomping Willow, and the bout of rule-breaking he and Ron were planning next. Okay, we've got a line break here. This is where we should add something to our notes. Going up here to the top of my second column. Alright, and you can see they decided to take the potion that night. You could write something down about the Christmas presents. Alright, let's get ready to read the second half of the chapter here. Okay, we have another line break on page 270. So we know that this is a scene change. This is later on. No one, not even someone dreading taking Polyjuice Potion later, could fail to enjoy Christmas dinner at Hogwarts. The Great Hall looked magnificent. Not only were there a dozen frost-covered Christmas trees and thick streamers of holly and mistletoe crisscrossing the ceiling, But enchanted snow was falling, warm and dry, from the ceiling. Dumbledore led them in a few of his favorite carols, Hagrid booming more and more loudly than with every goblet of eggnog he consumed. Percy, who hadn't noticed that Fred had bewitched his prefect badge so that it now read Pinhead, kept asking them all what they were sniggering at. Harry didn't even care that Draco Malfoy was making loud, snide remarks about his new sweater from the Slytherin table. With a bit of luck, Malfoy would be getting his comeuppance in a few hours' time. Harry and Ron had barely finished their third helping of Christmas pudding when Hermione ushered them out of the hall to finalize their plans for the evening. "We still need a bit of the people we're changing into," said Hermione matter-of-factly, as though she were sending them to the supermarket for laundry detergent. "And obviously, it'll be best if you can get something of Crabbe and Goyle's. They're Malfoy's best friends. He'll tell them anything. And we also need to make sure that the real Crabbe and Goyle can't burst in on us while we're interrogating him." "I've got it all worked out," she went on smoothly, ignoring Harry and Ron's stupefied faces. She held up 2 plump chocolate cakes. "I've filled these with a simple sleeping draught. All you have to do is make sure Crabbe and Goyle find them. You know how greedy they are. They're bound to eat them. Once they're asleep, pull out a few of their hairs and hide them in the broom closet." Harry and Ron looked incredulously at each other. "Hermione, I don't think that could go seriously wrong." But Hermione had a steely glint in her eye, not unlike the one Professor McGonagall sometimes had. Now, listen, on this page alone, I've underlined the word snide on page 270, comeuppance, interrogating, stupefied, and incredulously. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words on just those 2 pages alone. So by the time I'm done with this chapter, I will have underlined probably well over 20 words that I could go ahead and use that are interesting, fun, and challenging for my Frere models that I'm going to have to make later on. Top of page 272. "The potion will be useless without Crabbe and Goyle's hair," she said sternly. You do want to investigate Malfoy, don't you?" "Oh, all right, said Harry. "But what about you? Whose hair are you ripping out?" "I've already got mine," said Hermione brightly, pulling a tiny bottle out of her pocket and showing them the single hair inside it. "Remember Millicent Bulstrode wrestling with me at the dueling club? She left this on my robes when she was trying to strangle me. And she's gone home for Christmas, so I'll just have to tell the Slytherins I've decided to come back." When Hermione had bustled off to check on the Polyjuice potion, again, Ron turned to Harry with a doom-laden expression. "Have you ever heard of a plan where so many things could go wrong?" But to Harry and Ron's utter amazement, stage 1 of the operation went just as smoothly as Hermione had said. They lurked in the deserted entrance hall after Christmas tea, waiting for Crabbe and Goyle, who had remained alone at the Slytherin table, shoveling down 4th helpings of trifle. Harry had perched the chocolate cakes on the end of the banisters. When they spotted Crabbe and Goyle coming out of the great hall, Harry and Ron hid quickly behind a suit of armor next to the front door. "How thick can you get?" Ron whispered ecstatically as Crabbe gleefully pointed out the cakes to Goyle and grabbed them. Grinning stupidly, they stuffed the cakes whole into their large mouths. For a moment, both of them chewed greedily, looks of triumph on their faces. Then, without the smallest change of expression, they both keeled over backward onto the floor. By far the hardest part was hiding them in the closet across the hall. Once they were safely stowed away among the buckets and mops, Harry yanked out a couple of bristles that covered Goyle's forehead, and Ron pulled out several of Crabbe's hairs. They also stole their robes, because their own were far too small for Crabbe and Goyle-sized feet. Then, still stunned at what they had just done, they sprinted to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. They could hardly see for for the thick black smoke issuing from the stall in which Hermione was stirring the cauldron. Pulling their robes up over their faces, Harry and Ron knocked softly on the door. "Hermione!" They heard the scrape of the lock, and Hermione emerged, shiny-faced and looking anxious. Behind her, they heard the gloop-gloop of the bubbling, gluttonous potion. 3 glass tumblers stood ready on the toilet seat. "Did you get 'em?" Hermione asked breathlessly. Harry showed her Goyle's hair. "Good, and I sneaked these spare robes out of the laundry," Hermione said, holding up a small sack. "You'll need bigger sizes once you're Crabbe and Goyle." The 3 of them stared into the cauldron. Close up, the potion looked like thick, dark mud bubbling sluggishly. "I'm sure I've done everything right," said Hermione, nervously, rereading the splotched page of Most Potente Potions. "It looks like the book says it should. Once we've drunk it, we'll have exactly an hour before we change back into ourselves." "Now what?" Ron whispered. "We separate it into 3 glasses and add the hairs." Hermione ladled large dollops of the potion into each of the glasses. Then, her hand trembling, she shook Millicent Bulstrode's hair out of its bottle into the first glass. The potion hissed loudly like a boiling kettle and frothed madly. A second later, it had turned a sick sort of yellow. "Ugh! Essence of Millicent Bulstrode," said Ron, eyeing it with loathing. "Bet it tastes disgusting." "And yours, then?" said Hermione. Harry dropped Goyle's hair into the middle glass, and Ron put Crabbe's into the last one. Both glasses hissed and frothed. Goyle's turned the khaki color of a booger, Crabbe's a dark, murky brown. "Hang on," said Harry, as Ron and Hermione reached for their glasses. "We better not all drink them in here. Once we turn into Crabbe and Goyle, we won't fit, and Millicent Bulstrode's no pixie." "Good thinking," said Ron, unlocking the door. "We'll take separate stalls." Careful not to spill a drop of his polyjuice potion, Harry slipped into the middle stall. "Ready?" he called. "Ready!" came Ron and Hermione's voices. 1, 2, 3. Pinching his nose, Harry drank the potion down in 2 large gulps. It tasted like overcooked cabbage. Immediately, his insides started writhing, as though he just swallowed live snakes. Doubled up, he wondered whether he was going to be sick. Then a burning sensation spread rapidly from his stomach to the very ends of his fingers and toes. Next, bringing him gasping to all fours, came a horrible melting feeling, as the skin all over his body bubbled like a hot wax. And before his eyes, his hands began to grow. The fingers thickened. The nails broadened. The knuckles were bulging like bolts. His shoulders stretched painfully, and a prickling on his forehead told him that hair was creeping down towards his eyebrows. His robes ripped as his chest expanded like a barrel, bursting its hoops. His feet were agony in his shoes, 4 sizes too small. As suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. Harry lay face down on the stone-cold floor, listening to Myrtle's gurgling morosely in the end toilet. With difficulty, he kicked off his shoes and stood up. So this was what it felt like being Goyle. His large hand trembling, he pulled off his old robes, which were hanging a foot above his ankles, pulled on the spare ones, and laced up Goyle's boat-like shoes. He reached up to brush his hair out of his eyes, and met only the short growth of wiry bristles low on his forehead. Then he realized that his glasses were clouding his eyes because Goyle obviously didn't need them. He took them off and called, "Are you two okay?" Goyle's low rasp of a voice issued from his mouth. "Yeah," came the deep grunt of Crabbe from his right. Harry unlocked his door and stepped in front of the cracked mirror. Goyle stared back at him out of the dull, deepest eyes. Harry scratched his ear. So did Goyle. Ron's door opened. They stared at each other, except that he looked pale and shocked. Ron was indistinguishable from Crab, from the pudding bowl haircut to the long gorilla arms. "This is unbelievable," said Ron, approaching the mirror and prodding Crab's flat nose. "Unbelievable." "We'd better get going," said Harry, loosening the watch that was cutting into Goyle's thick wrist. "We've still got to find out where the Slytherin common room is. I only hope we can find someone to follow." Ron, who had been gazing at Harry, said, "You don't know how bizarre it is to see Goyle's thinking." He banged on Hermione's door. "Come on, we need to go." A high-pitched voice answered, I don't think I'm going to come after all. You go on without me." "Hermione, we know Millicent Bulstrode is ugly. No one's gonna know it's you." "No, really, I don't think I'll come. You two, hurry up, you're wasting time." Harry looked at Ron, bewildered. That looks more like Goyle," said Ron. "That's how he looks every time a teacher asks him a question." "Hermione, are you okay?" said Harry through the door. "Fine, I'm fine. Go on." Harry looked at his watch. 5 of their precious 60 minutes had already passed. "We'll meet you back here, all right," he said. All right, this is a good time. Now, we read a ton, but ironically enough, I don't think I would add a lot to my notes. Because again, simply, what have they done? Harry, Ron, and Hermione finished the Polyjuice Potion, and they drank it. It took a lot of pages with lots of details, but what's the most important stuff? The potion is done, and they drank the potion. And so you can see all of this stuff is stuff I put in my notes. But again, it's quite simple. I would focus on simply the fact that the potion is done, and they all drink the potion. Harry and Ron become Crabbe and Goyle. They're about to go find the Slytherin common room to talk to Malfoy. And something is preventing Hermione from going. Hermione here in the last minute says, "You guys go on without me. I'm not going to go." All right, I'm in the middle of page 279. Oh, no, sorry, I'm in the middle of page 278. Harry and Ron opened the door of the bathroom carefully, checked that the coast was clear, and set off. "Don't swing your arms like that," Harry muttered to Ron. "Huh? Crabbe holds them sort of stiff." "How's this?" "Yeah, that's better." They went down the marble staircase. All they needed now was a Slytherin that they could follow to the Slytherin common room. But there was nobody around. "Any ideas?" muttered Harry. "The Slytherins always come up to breakfast from over there," said Ron, nodding at the entrance to the dungeons. The words had barely left his mouth when a girl with long, curly hair emerged from the entrance. "Excuse me," said Ron, hurrying up to her. "We've forgotten the way to our common room." "I beg your pardon?" said the girl stiffly. "Our common room? I'm a Ravenclaw." She walked away, looking suspiciously back at them. Harry and Ron hurried down the stone steps into the darkness, their footsteps echoing particularly loud as Crabbe and Goyle's huge feet hit the floor, feeling that this wasn't going to be easy as they had hoped. The labyrinth passages were deserted. They walked deeper and deeper under the school, constantly checking their watches to see how much time they had left. After a quarter of an hour, just when they were getting desperate, they heard a sudden movement ahead. "Ha!" said Ron excitedly. "There's one of them now." The figure was emerging from a side room. As they hurried nearer, however, their hearts sank. It wasn't a Slytherin. It was Percy. "What are you doing down here?" said Ron in surprise. Percy looked affronted. "That," he said stiffly, "is none of your business. It's Crabbe, isn't it?" Page 280. Yeah, said Ron. "Well, get off to your dormitories," said Percy sternly. "It's not safe to go wandering around dark corridors these days." "You are," Ron pointed out. I, said Percy, drawing himself up, am a prefect. Nothing's about to attack me. A voice suddenly echoed behind Harry and Ron. Draco Malfoy was strolling toward them, and for the first time in his life, Harry was pleased to see him. Well, there you are, he drawled, looking at them. Have you two been pigging out in the Great Hall all this time? I've been looking for you. I want to show you something really funny. Malfoy glanced witheringly at Percy. And what are you doing down here, Weasley? He sneered. Percy looked outraged. You want to show a bit more respect to a school prefect, he said. I don't like your attitude. Malfoy sneered and motioned for Harry and Ron to follow him. Harry almost said nothing apologetic to Percy, but caught himself... Sorry, I gotta reread that. Harry almost said something apologetic to Percy, but caught himself just in time. He and Ron hurried after Malfoy, who said, as they turned into the next passage, That Peter Weasley. Percy, Ron corrected him automatically. Whatever, said Malfoy. I've noticed him sneaking around a lot lately, and I bet I know what he's up to. He thinks he's going to catch Slytherin's heir single-handed. He gave a short, derisive laugh. Harry and Ron exchanged excited looks. Malfoy paused by a stretch of bare, damp stone wall. What's the new password again? He said to Harry. Said Harry. Oh yeah, pure blood, said Malfoy, not listening, and a stone door concealed in the wall slid open. Malfoy marched through it, and Harry and Ron followed him. The Slytherin common room was a long, low, underground room with rough stone walls and ceiling, from which round greenish lamps were hanging on chains. A fire was crackling under an elaborately carved mantelpiece ahead of them, and several Slytherins were silhouetted around it in high-backed chairs. Wait here, said Malfoy to Harry and Ron, motioning them to a pair of empty chairs set back from the fire. I'll go and get it. My father's just sent it to me. Wondering what Malfoy was going to show them, Harry and Ron sat down, doing their best to look at home. Malfoy came back in a minute later, holding what looked like a newspaper clipping. He thrust it under Ron's nose. That'll give you a laugh, he said. Harry saw Ron's eyes widen in shock. He read the clipping quickly, gave a very forced laugh, and handed it to Harry. It had been clipped out of the Daily Prophet, and it said, Inquiry at the Ministry of Magic. Arthur Weasley, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, was today fined 50 galleons for bewitching a Muggle car. Mr. Lucius Malfoy, a governor of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where the enchanted car crashed earlier this year, called today for Mr. Weasley's resignation. Weasley has brought the ministry into disrepute. I'm going to underline that. Mr. Malfoy told our reporter. He is clearly unfit to draw up our laws, and his ridiculous Muggle Protection Act should be scrapped immediately. Mr. Weasley was unavailable for comment, although his wife told reporters to clear off, or she'd set the family ghoul on them. Well, said Malfoy impatiently, as Harry handed the clipping back to him. Don't you think it's funny? Ha ha, said Harry bleakly. Arthur Weasley loves Muggles so much he should snap his wand in half and go and join them, said Malfoy scornfully. You'd never know the Weasleys were purebloods the way they behave. Now, this would be a good time for us to stop and write something down. And here, you can see in my notes that Ron and Harry get into the Slytherin common room, and Draco hands them a clipping, and we find out now the penalty to Ron's father for what Harry and Ron did. He gets fined 50 galleons, and Draco's dad is saying he should resign, or his resignation. He's calling for his resignation, and that basically is when a person will say, I'm giving up my position. So if I was to resign as a teacher at APW, I would write a letter, I would formally announce that I'm going to be leaving my teaching position. And that's what Malfoy's dad is doing to Ron's dad. He's calling for his resignation. And, we know that this kind of thing happens often, especially with political figures. And when they get into trouble, people start calling for their resignations. Or we know that there was recently in Minnesota, there was another police officer shooting. And the female police officer who shot the person, she resigned the very next day because so many people in the community were calling for her resignation. So she resigned her position and she's no longer a police officer. So we can see there are some real consequences for Ron's dad for what Harry and Ron did back on September 1st so that they could get to Hogwarts. So make sure that you guys take a minute and write something down there in your notes. Alright, we got about 5 pages to go. Let's finish up this chapter. Let's see if Harry and Ron can learn something useful from Draco about the Chamber of Secrets. Okay. And again, here we see something that J.K. Rowling has done for us. When we start thinking about the main idea of this chapter, it's called the Polyjuice Potion, and that is the main idea of this chapter. The main idea of the chapter is this is the chapter where we get to see Harry, Ron, and Hermione take this Polyjuice Potion and all the events that lead up to them being able to take the potion, to them actually taking the potion, and now the information that they're finding out because they have taken the potion and they've been able to disguise themselves as Crabbe and Goyle. So think about this tomorrow as you write your summaries. Your main idea should have something to do with the fact that in this chapter, Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally drink the Polyjuice Potion, and we get to go on this journey with them. Alright, let's go ahead and let's keep on reading. Alright, I'm on the top of page 283. Ron's, or rather Crabbe's, face was contorted with fury. "What's up with you, Crabbe?" snapped Malfoy. "Stomachache," Ron grunted. "Well, go up to the hospital wing and give all those mudbloods a kick for me," said Malfoy, snickering. "I'm surprised the Daily Prophet hasn't reported all of these attacks yet," he went on thoughtfully. "I suppose Dumbledore's trying to hush it all up. He'll be sacked if it doesn't stop soon. Father's always saying old Dumbledore's the worst thing that's ever happened to this place. He loves Muggleborns. A decent headmaster would never have let slime like that Creevy in." Malfoy started taking pictures with an imaginary camera and did a cruel but accurate impression of Colin. "Potter, can I have your picture, Potter? Can I have your autograph? Can I lick your shoes, please, Potter?" He dropped his hands and looked at Harry and Ron. "What's the matter with you two?" Far too late, Harry and Ron forced themselves to laugh, but Malfoy seemed satisfied. Perhaps Crabbe and Goyle were always slow on the uptake. "Saint Potter, the Mudblood's friend," said Malfoy slowly. "He's another one with no proper wizard feelings. With no proper wizard feeling. Or he wouldn't go around with that jumped-up Granger Mudblood. And people think he's Slytherin's heir." Harry and Ron waited with bated breath. Malfoy was surely seconds away from telling them it was him. But then, "I wish I knew who it is," said Malfoy petulantly. "I could help them." Ron's jaw dropped, so that Crabbe looked even more clueless than usual. Fortunately, Malfoy didn't notice, and Harry, thinking fast, said, "You must have some idea who's behind it all." "You know I haven't, Goyle. How many times do I have to tell you?" snapped Malfoy. "And Father won't tell me anything about the last time the chamber was opened either. Of course, it was 50 years ago, so it was before his time. But he knows all about it, and he says that it was all kept quiet, and it all looks suspicious, if I know too much about it. But I know one thing. Last time the chamber was opened, a mudblood died. So I bet it's a matter of time before one of them is killed this time. I hope it's Granger," he said with relish. Ron was clenching Crabbe's gigantic fists. Feeling that it would be a bit of a giveaway if Ron punched Malfoy, Harry shot him a warning look and said, "Do you know if the person who opened the chamber last time was caught?" "Oh, yeah. Whoever it was expelled," said Malfoy. "They're probably still in Azkaban." "Azkaban?" said Harry, puzzled. "Azkaban, the wizard prison." "Goyle," said Malfoy, looking at him in disbelief. "Honestly, if you were any slower, you'd be going backward." Alright, this would be another good spot for us to just stop, because now we just learned. Was Draco the one opening the Chamber of Secrets? The answer is no. And he doesn't know who has been opening the Chamber of Secrets. But we did learn something. That 50 years ago, when the chamber was opened, a mudblood or a muggle-born student was killed. So make sure you take a minute, pause the video if you need to, add that to your notes. He shifted restlessly in his chair and said, "Father says to keep my head down and let the heir of Slytherin get on with it. He says the school needs ridding of all mudblood filth, but not to get mixed up in it. Of course, he's got a lot in his plate at the moment. You know, the Ministry of Magic raided our manor last week." Harry tried to force Goyle's dull face into a look of concern. "Yeah?" said Malfoy. "Luckily, they didn't find much. Father's got some very valuable dark arts stuff. But luckily, we've got our own secret chamber under the drawing room floor." "Oh," said Ron. Malfoy looked at him. Now see, again, I love all these things that J.K. Rowling has done. This little chamber in the Malfoy house comes back and it plays an important role in Book 7. The reference to Azkaban, Book 3 is called Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Even Ron's rat, Scabbers, comes back in Book 3, and we discover so much about Ron's rat. And throughout these books, J.K. Rowling weaves in so many of these wonderful little things that upon our first reading, we would just overlook them. But then as we go back and we reread them after we know the entire story, we realize how important they were. So Draco here, when he says, "But luckily, we've got our own secret chamber under the drawing room floor," you and I might just read that and just keep on going. But when you read Book 7, you come back and you realize how important that little chamber under their drawing room floor turns out to be. Malfoy looked at him. So did Harry. Ron blushed. Even his hair was turning red. His nose was also slowly lengthening. Their hour was up. Ron was turning back into himself, and from the look of horror he was suddenly giving Harry, he must be too. They both jumped to their feet. "Medicine for my stomach," Ron grunted, and without further ado, they sprinted the length of the Slytherin common room, hurled themselves at the stone wall, and dashed up the passage, hoping against hope that Malfoy hadn't noticed anything. Harry could feel his feet slipping around in Goyle's huge shoes, and had to hoist up his robes as he shrank. They crashed up the steps into the dark entrance hall, which was full of a muffled pounding coming from the closet where they'd locked Crabbe and Goyle. Leaving their shoes outside the closet door, they sprinted in their socks up the marble staircase toward Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. "Well, it wasn't a complete waste of time," Ron panted, closing the bathroom door behind them. "I know we still haven't found out who's doing the attacks, but I'm going to write to Dad tomorrow and tell him to check under the Malfoys' drawing room." Harry checked his face in the cracked mirror. He was back to normal. He put his glasses on and Ron hammered on the door of Hermione's stall. "Hermione, come out! We've got loads to tell you!" "Go away!" Hermione squeaked. Harry and Ron looked at each other. "What's the matter?" said Ron. "You must be back to normal by now. We are." But Moaning Myrtle glided suddenly through the stall door. Harry had never seen her looking so happy. "Oh, wait till you see," she said. "It's awful." They heard the lock slide back and Hermione emerged, sobbing, her robes pulled up over her head. "What's up?" said Ron uncertainly. "Have you still got Millicent's nose or something?" Hermione let her robes fall, and Ron backed into the sink. Her face was covered in black fur. Her eyes had turned yellow, and there was long, pointed ears poking through her hair. "It was a cat hair," she howled. "Millicent Bulstrode must have a cat, and the potion isn't supposed to be used for animal transformations." "Uh-oh," said Ron. "You'll be teased something dreadful," said Myrtle happily. "It's okay, Hermione," said Harry quickly. "We'll take you up to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey never asks too many questions." It took a long time to persuade Hermione to leave the bathroom. Moaning Myrtle sped them on their way with a hearty guffaw. "Wait till everyone finds out you've got a tail." And that's where the chapter ends. Okay, please take a moment and add that last bit of information down. Okay, so again, it wasn't an entire waste. They didn't find out who is responsible for opening the chamber, but they know that it's not Draco, and they do know that Draco's dad now has this chamber, and Ron says that he's going to tell his dad to look for that chamber. And poor Hermione has been turned into a cat. So, while they didn't find complete success by drinking the Polyjuice Potion, they definitely learned some important information that they can use going forward. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, before you guys submit your notes, okay, take some time to read through some of these discussion questions. Again, I know that these chapters are always long and we like to stop and pause and write down notes as we are going. But some of the things that you guys could think about is what do Harry and Ron learn from Malfoy? Make sure you fully understand that. In the end, what does the Polyjuice Potion do to Hermione? And here's the big one. If you were Harry, Ron, or Hermione, what would you guys do next? Alright, this was their big plan. Let's use Polyjuice Potion. We can figure out that it's Malfoy, and then we will have we can know what to do next. Alright? That's a big one. And then the other one to me that's big is, if you were Harry, would you have told Dumbledore about the voice and all those other things that are concerning you when Dumbledore asks Harry, is there anything else you want to tell me? Okay, so once your notes are done, guys, you're going to make sure you go over here to our Google Classroom. You're going to click on the Classworks tab, and right under the Unit 3 assignment, your next assignment, again, you guys can see here, I've got lots of assignments planned out for us, but you are going to go here to this Chapter 11 notes, and go ahead and make sure that you submit a good, clear picture of your notes. Make sure that they include the date, the title, and the page number. And next time I see you guys, we will be doing some writing. We have a quiz to do, and you guys are going to participate in the 45-second summary challenge once again. So, until I see you guys next time, have a good afternoon, a great night. Bye-bye.